Megan Castellano had 90 seconds of blood pressure left, and a chest wound that made the trauma surgeon, 2 beds over, stop mid-sentence and stare. The paramedics came through the ambulance bay doors of St. Joseph's Regional in Hamilton shouting vitals over each other, the gurney wheels shrieking against the linoleum, the monitor already screaming, before it was even plugged into the wall. The kind of chaos that, in any other room, would have frozen every single person in it for at least a second or two. Not the nurse standing at the triage desk. She was already moving before the doors finished swinging open. Her name was Nora Beckwith. She'd worked nights in the emergency department at St. Joseph's for almost 3 years, and in that time almost nobody had managed to learn much of anything about her. Not because she was unfriendly. She wasn't, not really. But because she had a way of being present without ever quite being known. She answered questions, she didn't ask many. She showed up early, left late, and when the younger nurses went out for drinks, after a brutal shift, she always had some quiet, polite reason she couldn't make it. The charge nurse, a woman named Donna Pelletier who'd been at St. Joseph's for 19 years and considered herself a fairly good judge of people, had once described Nora to another nurse as a little robotic, honestly. Not realizing Nora was standing 4 feet away, behind the supply cart restocking gauze. Nora hadn't said a word. She'd finished counting out the dressings she needed, closed the cabinet, and walked back to her station, like she hadn't heard a thing. She had heard every word. That night, the night the man with 90 seconds of blood pressure left came through the doors, Nora Beckwith stopped being the quiet one. Nobody could quite place. She had him assessed in under 5 seconds. Tension pneumothorax left side this time, not right. His trachea was already shifting, a thin, urgent line under the skin of his throat. His oxygen sat at 58% and dropping, and the monitor was throwing an alarm that the 2 residents standing near the bed hadn't even processed yet. They were still waiting for anyone to tell them what to do. The attending on call, a heavy-set man named Dr. Okonkwo Rayleigh, was at the nurse's station with a phone wedged against his ear, mid-argument with someone in radiology. He didn't even look up. Nora didn't wait for him. She snapped a glove onto her right hand in one motion. The kind of motion that doesn't get taught in a 4-year nursing program. Called out for a 14-gauge needle. In a voice that cut clean through the noise of the room, and was already at the second intercostal space before Dr. Okonkwo Riley so much as glanced over. One of the residents, a tall kid named Whitford, maybe a year into his rotation, started to say something about waiting for the attending's sign-off. Nora looked at him. Just once he stopped talking. The needle decompression took her 9 seconds. The man's oxygen saturation started climbing within 20. By the time Dr. Okonkwo Riley actually made it to the bedside, stethoscope swinging, the worst of it was already over. He looked at the monitor, looked at Nora. Didn't say anything useful the way men in his position rarely do in moments like that. She was already prepping the chest tube tray before he'd finished clearing his throat. What nobody in that trauma bay noticed. Not Whitford, not Dr. Okonkwo Riley, not the paramedics, who were technically supposed to be observing and charting, was the way Nora's hands moved through all of it. Not just competent, not even just skilled. Rehearsed. The kind of rehearse that doesn't come from a simulation lab or a hospital in service. The kind that comes from doing this exact thing. Somewhere with no equipment cart, no sterile field, no attending to glance over your shoulder. The kind that comes from doing it in the dark in conditions nobody back home would ever be told about, with someone's life narrowing down to your 2 hands and nothing else. 3 men had come in with him. What was left, apparently, of a group that had been together that night doing whatever they'd been doing. Something that officially hadn't happened at all. They sat in the family waiting area in jeans and jackets that didn't fit them quite right. The way clothes never quite sit properly on men, whose bodies have been built for something other than ordinary life. They didn't talk much. They watched the double doors to the trauma bay, the way some people watch weather rolling in, quietly, carefully, like they already knew something was coming. The one nearest the door introduced himself to no one in particular as Holt. Corporal Daniel Holt. He'd been with his unit for 8 years, had worked alongside people from programs that didn't have names you could say out loud, support staff whose IDs never matched any roster he was ever shown. He had a habit, not even a conscious one, just something his brain did on its own, of cataloging people, details, filed away without him meaning to. when the trauma bay doors swung open for a few seconds, and he caught a glimpse of the nurse working on his friend. Holt filed one detail he hadn't meant to notice at all. The inside of her left forearm. Her sleeve had ridden up while she reached across the bed, and there just below the crook of her elbow was a small mark. Dark ink, angular, deliberate. Not the kind of thing someone gets on a whim on a Friday night. A very specific shape. He'd seen it exactly twice before in his career. Both times on people whose actual identities sat somewhere well above his clearance, both times in situations nobody ever spoke about again once they were over. He didn't say anything. He looked down at the waiting room floor, breathing slow and even, while his mind worked fast underneath all that stillness, pulling at threads. The way a trained mind does when something it isn't supposed to recognize suddenly surfaces in the middle of an ordinary night. He glanced at the man beside him, gave the smallest nod. They both understood. Whatever that nurse was, she wasn't only what the badge clipped to her scrubs said she was. And the man bleeding out behind those doors, broken, barely stabilized, alive only because of the last 90 seconds, was currently in the hands of someone whose past sat behind a door that almost nobody had clearance to open. If there's one thing worth remembering about people like that, it's this. The most dangerous person in any room is usually the one nobody thought to ask a sensation about. The man. His name was Sergeant Wade Faraday. Made it through the night. By 4 in the morning, the worst of the danger had passed. Chest tube placed, vitals holding. That particular hard-fought stillness that follows a body being pulled back from somewhere close to the edge. The ICU nurse who took over his care later mentioned almost in passing that whoever stabilized him initially clearly had unusual experience. She said it like a compliment. She meant it like a question. Nobody answered her. Nora finished her charting, logged her notes, then went back out onto the floor like nothing unusual had happened. She didn't go check on Faraday again. Not because she didn't care, but because she'd learned a long time ago in a different life that caring too visibly about the wrong things in the wrong rooms was its own kind of risk. Holt didn't sleep. He sat in that waiting area as the windows along the hallway shifted from black to the specific gray that comes right before sunrise over Lake Ontario. And he spent the whole stretch of it doing what he always did when something didn't sit right, turning it over from every angle until it either made sense or he became more certain it never would. That mark on her arm wasn't something his brain was willing to let go of. He had what amounted to a photographic memory for symbols that actually mattered. Like a person who's learned a second language and can never again hear a word in it without understanding it. That mark belonged to a world most people in Canada, most people anywhere, had no idea existed. A program so deeply compartmentalized, it didn't even have an official name anywhere he'd ever been cleared to read. Just a designation. Something people who coordinated near it used, without ever being told what it actually was. He pulled out his phone and opened an encrypted thread his unit used for non-operational chatter. He typed, "Anyone know who's working nights in the ER at St. Joseph's in Hamilton?" Then Beckwith. Female. Dark blonde hair, left forearm. He didn't describe the mark itself. You didn't put something like that into writing. Not even on a secure line. He just added, "You'll know what I mean if you've ever seen it." The reply came back 35 minutes later. One line from a contact 2 ranks above him, whose name he wouldn't have said out loud in front of strangers. Don't ask her anything. Don't acknowledge it. And be grateful whatever you believe in, that she happened to be the one on shift. Holt read it 3 times. Then he set the phone face down on his knee, and just sat with it for a while. He thought about Faraday on that table, about the 9 seconds, about the way Nora had moved. Not like someone performing a skill they'd practiced, but like someone for whom that skill had stopped being a skill a long time ago, and had simply become reflex, the way breathing is reflex. He'd seen that exact quality before, plenty of times in operators. He had never once seen it in a hospital. Never in someone wearing scrubs with a cartoon bandage sticker stuck to her badge that some kid in pediatrics had clearly given her. At 6:15, shift change started. Nora came through the unit to hand off her patients to the day staff, moving fast, professional, not looking toward the waiting area at all. Holt stood up anyway. She stopped. He hadn't planned anything to say, which wasn't like him. What came out was the only thing that felt honest. "You saved my friend's life last night." Nora looked at him for a moment. Not the way most civilians look at someone who's clearly been somewhere rough. Not with that performance of awe or discomfort. People usually do when they don't know what else to offer. She looked at him the way you look at a person who's standing closer to the truth than they're supposed to be. And he could almost see her calculating in real time exactly how much of that truth this particular hallway at 6:15 in the morning actually required. He's tough, she said. He did most of the work himself. Holt nodded. He let 2 seconds pass. Then quietly, without pointing, without even glancing down toward her arm, he said, "Someone I know wanted me to pass something along. Said to tell the program doesn't forget its people." Nora went very still. It was the stillness of someone who hasn't heard a particular language spoken aloud in a long, long time, and is having to calibrate, mid-breath, to the sound of it. Her face didn't change in any way a casual observer would have caught. But Holt wasn't a casual observer, and he saw exactly what moved behind her eyes for half a second. Not fear, not guilt. Something older than either of those. The particular kind of weight carried by people who gave everything to something, got no credit for any of it, and were asked when it was over, to just quietly disappear back into ordinary life. She held his gaze for another second. Then she said, "Tell him the program never had to remember me. I remembered it just fine on my own." She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and headed for the exit. The early light coming through the hospital's front windows caught the inside of her left arm as she pushed the door open, and for just a moment the mark was visible. Dark, precise, carrying the weight of a story no declassified file would ever fully tell. Holt watched her walk out into the parking lot, past the line of taxis idling for the morning shift change, toward whatever ordinary life she was about to spend the rest of her day pretending to live. Behind him, the other man let out a long breath. Neither of them said anything for a while. Because there are people who serve in ways the world is never going to applaud them for. Who carry what they gave into quiet apartments and ordinary jobs, and overnight shifts nobody thanks them for. Who bled for something bigger than themselves. And then, when it was time, simply vanished back into the crowd without complaint. Gracefully, with nothing to show for it, but a small mark on their skin, and a set of hands that never forgot what they used to do. Nora Beckwith walked out into a gray Hamilton morning, got into a 10-year-old hatchback in the staff lot, and drove home to an apartment with a single houseplant on the windowsill and nothing on the walls. She was just a nurse. She had always technically only ever been a nurse. And somehow, that was the most powerful thing about her.